So DeviceAlliance is a nonprofit organization. It's the only one here in SoCal, specifically dedicated to the medical device community. We're here to foster collaboration, networking event, and on the young professional side, we are here to help students, young professionals, individuals early in their career, people who want to switch into the medtech industry, to be able to make those jumps as well as transition from academia to industry, because that's something that we've noticed that doesn't exist readily available in college and in school. We have many different members from all over in terms of our mega site for Medtech, where we have J&J representatives, Edwards, Medtronics, but we also have companies like Diality, Microvention, C-Spine, companies that are very popular here in the Orange County area. So it's a perfect place if you're pursuing Medtech for your industry of interest. So in terms of just upcoming events, then after tonight, we have a few more. This is part 3 of our 7 workshops for career development training. Our next one coming up is one focusing on crafting your personal branding, utilizing LinkedIn. And that's actually led by one of our speakers here tonight, Greg Johnson. And then we also have crafting resumes, cover letters, as well as acing interviews with the Azure group. And then lastly, towards the summer, we'll be doing mentorship. And then going towards the end of the year, we will be doing a second level sort of professional development. So what does it look like after you've obtained your job? So if you're interested or you want to find more information, go on to DeviceAlliance.org. You can email me if you want to just chat. And even if you don't want to be a member, I want to be a resource for you as well. So let me know how I can help you. So tonight's panel focuses on education versus experience. I just read an article in LinkedIn that talked about how because of the wave of our SAT scores, ACT scores, that college applications went up by like 42% across the nation. And so the sort of question of whether more education is actually better for you versus maybe you should go out and get experience is sort of the sole focus of this panel. And tonight our panel is moderated by Erin Sunga. She is a senior regulatory affairs specialist at Endologics. She is also a young professionals committee member, and she's part of the OG back in 2018 when it got started. So I'm happy to be able to pass this panel along to her to be able to moderate.
Awesome. Thank you, Joanne. I believe Reyes joined, so I don't know if you want to pin him to the top.
Yes, I can do that. Why don't you go ahead and introduce everyone?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, sure. So let's start off with just doing a brief background on each one of our panelists today. First, we have Greg Johnson. He earned his Bachelor of Arts in International Business with a minor in Japanese from Cal State Fullerton, along with he earned a certificate in Japan Business and Market Entry. Throughout his career, he has held a variety of upper management positions at companies such as Mitsui Construction Company, Regis Japan, Lion Office Products, and Jaguar Land Rover North America. He now wears a lot of different hats as an executive coach, career management strategist, and speaker for Above the Rim Executive Coaching, along with the Director of Marketing Operations at Insurance Education Association and Director at Crowdfunding Planning. Next, we have Reyes Ram. He earned his BS in Biomedical Engineering from UC Irvine. Following graduation, he held various engineering positions at BioSpec and Medtronic. While working full-time at Medtronic, he started an accelerated MBA program at UC Irvine. He later transitioned to Exonics as an operations engineer. While finishing up the program, he was promoted to project manager, which is his current role at Exonics. And shortly afterwards, he completed the program and received his MBA. Next, we have Dr. Rose. She earned her BS in physics from Dillard University, following with her PhD in biomedical engineering from Mayo Clinical Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences. Following academia, she began her career at Merck as a senior research specialist, where she was later promoted to manager of oncology biomarker programs. While at Merck, she received her Lean Six Sigma Green Belt certification and became a certified project manager. She is now the managing director and principal consultant at Roseutics, a boutique consultancy business that she started approximately 9.5 years ago. Next, we have Will Kim. He earned his BS in molecular cell and developmental biology from UCLA, which he followed with receiving his PhD in cellular and molecular pathology, also from UCLA. After leaving academia, he held scientist positions at Fate Therapeutics and Irvine Scientific, and following as a senior medical writer at Allergan. He briefly held a position as a manager in scientific communications at Edwards Life Sciences, and is now a senior manager in medical publishing at an AbbVie company called Cyclics. And last but not least, we have Ted Yu. He earned his BS in physics from Cal Poly Pomona, where he also was a adjunct professor. He later earned his PhD in material science from UC Irvine. He began his career outside of academia as a contract engineer at Metronome, where he worked his way up from a contract position to a full-time employee as a test engineer, and is now a scientist 3 and is working on the next generation continuous glucose monitor. Let's welcome our panelists, and let's begin with a little bit of a generic question to kind of get a little bit more background on your thought process of why you decided to pursue upper or higher education. So what was your thought process behind getting your PhD or your MBA or your MS? Let's start with Will.
All right. I guess I don't know how far back to go. Maybe it's just I don't want to take too much time. So just initially, for me, believe it or not, I actually started off as a graphic designer, and I was gonna go to school for that, but it was too expensive. So I decided to go to community college and take GE, like just the general requirements to go back. And I ended up taking a biology course, and I fell in love with just how amazing the cell is. And how it operates. And then that led to me taking more courses, eventually changed my major completely, decided to go to UCLA and major in molecular cell developmental biology. And it was from there where I guess like that whole like trajectory was not necessarily, I wasn't necessarily thinking like career-wise. It was more just purely based on, hey, I find this stuff super interesting, and let's just kind of see where it'll lead me. And then the next natural step was, okay, well, I want to continue doing research, and I like this, like the academic setting. Why not just get a PhD and kind of keep doing what I've been doing as an undergrad? So decided to do a PhD, and then from there it was now trying to figure out like, okay, like what do I want to do? Because like I need to figure out like what's going to happen to me after I graduate. And unfortunately at that time, although like my heart was set on being trying to become a professor. The funding situation overall is just really, really difficult. And that's when I had to start considering other options. And that's when I began to look outside of academia. But just so quite in a bit of a nutshell, like that, it was that initial just passion for science, particularly cell biology, that led me from, to even get my Bachelor of Science in the degree that I did, and then pursue further education in my PhD studies.
Awesome. Let's go on to Reyes, and then we'll circle around, and then maybe end off with Greg, since you can kind of give us a little bit more idea of what we should be looking for, what questions we should be asking when deciding to go into higher education.
Sure. So when I was deciding about my higher education goals, I actually was considering if I should pursue a master's in engineering, since I was already kind of down that track. And being an engineer, at that time I was employed with Medtronic, I was thinking about how to continue to accelerate and progress my career. And I think what I did was I really took a good look at the coursework that was going to be applicable to that master's program that I was interested in, as well as other campuses and programs across the nation to see what was interesting to me. And I guess what happened to me was a lot of that coursework felt like it overlapped with my undergrad, especially because I was looking at a master's in biomedical engineering. And when I came across the MBA program, I realized, wow, I actually don't know a lot of the things in the MBA program. And thinking about it more, I was thinking, okay, this I think will make me a more holistic person, right? When I'm going to work every day, I'm thinking about what are the goals and things that I need to get done to make my particular project successful? What do I need to do to, think about this from, my standpoint here? And I think what the MBA program coursework showed me that, hey, there's actually coursework out there that will let you think about things about, strategic thinking or entrepreneurial skills that I didn't have. How do I think about what makes the business successful, not just you and your small project that you're working on? How does that give you a more holistic approach? So that really intrigued me, and so I looked further into it. So I think looking at coursework is really important, and seeing what interests you when you're pursuing higher education.
Awesome. Ted, did you want to go next?
Sure. I took kind of a very circuitous route to get to where I am. I kind of like Will, I was doing something completely different. I used to be a cook, and that's what I actually went to school for that, and I have an AA in culinary arts and all that stuff. I realized like, hey, like my dad always tells me, hey, you gotta do better than I did, and I try to do better than my dad did and all that stuff. And he's an engineer, right? And I figured, all right, I'll be a physicist then. So I went to school for physics. Because I figure if you're making stuff, I'll figure out the theory to make stuff, I guess. That was kind of my line of reasoning, right? And then all I knew after I finished grad school was that I like exploring things. I fancy myself an explorer. And specifically, I like using computational tools to do all of the exploring with. And if that was true, then pretty much PhD was kind of a non-starter. I wanted to live on the very knife edge of knowledge, trying to expand out what we know as a species, what little a human possibly could. And then so I went on to UCI for my PhD. I actually, there, I was not doing medical device stuff at all. I was working on nuclear fuel recycling systems. Specifically, a lot of the solvents, I was doing atomistic level simulations of those solvents to figure out, hey, what's going to work better for us. And then what happened was, well, after that ended, a guy I know who's maybe he's friends with some of you guys, Harinder Singh at the UCI. He runs GPS STEM at UCI. He goes, well, I know you're like, waiting around for postdocs. You're not really doing anything right now. Oh, you can go make some change on the side, do this job. It's going to be pretty easy. They just want you to work in a microscope, right? I'm like, all right, sure. Turned out the company I'm with now, Metronome, like there's a lot of R&D questions that we're still asking. And I started asking a lot of those R&D questions. And what ended up happening, I took a lot of that data to answer those R&D questions. I'm like, all right, I might be invested in med devices after all. And then so now here I am working on trying to bridge like what we're doing, the experiments that we have, and then trying to turn that into finite element models so that we can kind of figure out how our sensor is going to go. And that's kind of how I ended up. But really, ultimately, all I knew was I just like to discover things, and I like computers to do that. So here I am.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I feel like a lot of people usually, at least myself included, use school to kind of explore new things and not completely having an idea or a plan in mind. It's sometimes just an exploratory process. Dr. Rose, would you like to add anything on your thought process as well?
Sure. Like many of the panelists here, my journey was a natural evolution as well. I didn't quite start off as a cook, Dr. Ted, or as a graphic artist. I graduated from high school in Barbados with the intent of going to college to study computer science. And while I was there, I stumbled across this wonderful research program. The professors got me involved in doing research on campus. I started tutoring other students in science and very quickly became entrenched in the Division of Natural Sciences at Dillard. I was involved in a program where their job really was to ensure that many of us graduated from college and eventually went on to research. And so I was actually encouraged and mentored into my choice to pursue a PhD. I wouldn't pretend that it was an intentional thing at all. It wasn't, I wouldn't say that I so much wanted to go that direction. But certainly when I got involved with the research and got embedded into the lab, and the work was so just satisfying as far as discovering new things, exploring like the others have mentioned. I kind of got sucked in. And when I was graduating, or at least a little bit before I was graduating, then the thought became, well, what next, right? What do I do with a physics degree? Well, what do I do with a physics degree? And so the next step really was, I think, a natural one, in the sense that I was being groomed anyway to do my PhD. And then I went to graduate school at Mayo. I ended up doing biomedical engineering and specializing in medical imaging. But there's a part of this story that I think I should share. Somewhere at the end of my second year, when I was preparing for qualifying exams, this weight descended upon me. And I kept thinking, I'm in the wrong place. I'm in the wrong place. I should be doing my MBA. I want to start my own company. I want to be, you know, that entrepreneur. I want to make impact in this world. What am I doing here? And at the time, I guess the family pressure was there too, Dr. Ted. You know, you're supposed to end up better than your parents, kind of thing. But also, I had a lot of influences around me that were all about finishing what I started. And the idea that, you know, if I'm supposed to get an MBA in life, that will happen too. But I was in the PhD program, I was doing well. And the idea is that I should finish it. And I listened to them. I mean, today, if I could do it all over again, I probably wouldn't listen. Because I think that after a while, what you also discover in life is that, you know, following your passion when you can identify it is so critical, is so important. Because we all have to wake up every day and we want to jump out of bed. We don't want to crawl out and be like, oh, that's a job. You want to jump out of bed every morning and be doing something that you want to do. And when I identified in my second, third year that I wanted to do an MBA instead, I probably should have gone that route. But anyway, I stuck with it. I finished it. And of course, taking that pathway then, you know, essentially created then this trajectory that I'm on. I'm going to pause here just in case there are questions or anyone else wants to add to that.
Yep, sounds good. And then let's finish this off with Greg. Is there anything that you would advise someone who's considering an MBA or MS or a PhD to kind of see it from that perspective? You also have a master's of your own, so maybe if you want to touch on that as well.
Okay, well, the first thing that I'd have to say is that Dr. Rose said something very critical. Dr. Will also mentioned following the passion. And I think it is very critical. In fact, in a lot of my career coaching, there's a concept I teach. It's a Japanese word called ikigai. And the literal translation is that for which I wake up in the morning. So when Dr. Rose was talking about doing something that you're excited to jump out of bed, and the reality is, I love what I do. I love waking up and going to work because I love what I do. I don't think I'm going to retire. I have no plans whatsoever to retire just because I really love what it is that I do. But in addition to following your passion in terms of your education, so when Will was talking about really being exposed to biology and then falling in love with that and having the passion, I think that is really, really important. But along the way, there are things that you need to do in the education process that it's more than just about academia. It's also, what are you doing to develop your social skills? What are you doing to develop your competencies in working with other people? Because success in the corporate world takes very different skills than the skills it takes to succeed in academia. And so, one of the things that I would recommend strongly for anyone who is going and pursuing any higher education is, while pursuing that education, leverage that with being involved in organizations like Young Professionals Committee, and not only just going to meetings and learning, but I would say volunteer, get on committees, get on positions. Now, I haven't spoken to Joanne, so I don't know if they have any positions open, but I have really never seen any volunteer organization that has too many volunteers, because a lot of people don't volunteer. But the rich rewards you get in that kind of activity really set you up for having success in dealing with working in the corporate world, getting your next position, but also setting yourself up to have promotions throughout your career. Those are the things that I would, like to say, to focus on right now.
That's some great insight. So it sounds like collectively there's a couple of different reasons that some people decided to get their higher education, whether it was trying to figure out what you even want to do, or trying to develop or push your career even further. Like Rhea said, that he was trying to find something that was going to help his career as well, and also just following your passion as you try to find it as well. So those are all great different ways that people get into higher education, and also some good advice from Greg on how to strengthen and develop your soft skills that when you decide to go within a higher education program, and getting involved as much as possible. And DeviceAlliance is always looking for volunteers, so I'm sure Joanne has probably asked a million times, so reach out to her for sure.
She shouldn't have to ask you. You should be going to her to find out what's available. She should never have to ask anyone. There should be a lineup of people that want to do it, because the skills you get, the benefits you get will, I just can't recommend that enough, and how that will help you in your career.
Yeah, I can definitely advocate for that. I've been a part of DeviceAlliance for quite a while now, and I'm still learning and I'm still growing. And as you can kind of tell, I'm a little nervous doing this, but I got to develop my presentation skills as well. So I guess kind of moving on, so go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a question in the chat. I was wondering, do we address it while it's pressing, or do we wait?
Yeah, if it's something that's still relevant to the conversation, go for it.
Yeah, so Ethan asked about essentially, how do you know what you like to do? To him, it seems there are too many choices and options to fully explore. And that is certainly the challenge of being young, isn't it? Too many choices, too many options, too much time. But I would say that exposure is what does it. You know, I didn't know that I wanted to, you know, potentially do an MBA until I met entrepreneurial people who, you know, I completely vibed with and felt like, oh, they're doing what I would like to be doing. I didn't know the value either in research or kind of like the scientific pursuits until I tried them either. And I think many on the panel here discovered things they loved by just trying. It can be accidental for some, and it can be very intentional for others. And I think it's really just about exposing yourself to as much as possible early.
I can't agree with that anymore. It's a very powerful idea of getting exposed. When I was going to school, I was studying business, and then I had an opportunity to go to Japan for a homestay. And it was something that I had no experience. It was a spur of the moment decision. I wasn't planning on going, but when I saw a notice for an opportunity a month and a half later, I was on the airplane going to Japan, not knowing the language, not knowing the food, not understanding that I did love fish. I didn't think I liked fish at the time. But it was something that it was an eye-opening experience. It was a learning experience, and it completely shifted what I wanted to do for my career. So what Dr. Rose is saying about exposing yourself to things is one of the most critical things you do. And when you fall in love with something, dive in and go for it.
I'd like to add to that too, if I may. So kind of in that question, there's like a coded, so I agree with everything that's being said. You just want to expose yourself to as many things as you can. You gotta accept you're not gonna be able to do everything, man. You just do as much as you can. And if something just jibes with you, something vibe is such a good word in this context, go for it. But that being said, there's always like this hidden coded question that's always being asked when this particular question comes up, right? Is how am I gonna do the thing that makes me happy? Number one, you're gonna have to let that question go, dude. Science is hard. Happiness is not in what you do, it's in who you are. Number one. Number two, your satisfaction as a scientist, your satisfaction and fulfillment as a scientist is derived from two things. It's not from what you do. It's not the topic that you research. It's in your ability to predict, and it's in your ability to measure what you predict, or vice versa, or predict what you measure. That's where your satisfaction as a scientist comes from. So speaking of Japan, so I know a dear friend of mine is a historian. He studies disease transmission in ancient, not ancient. So modern, when Japan was transitioning from like a feudal economy to a modern economy, like how it was back in the 50s, one of the problems that was going around was like fecal oral route diseases. This is very common for whenever you're making a transition from an agricultural economy to like a modernized industrial one. So there was a scientist there who he quoted a passage. It was about from a scientist who talked about his lab out in the field, which was essentially just heaps of dung, manure that was collected from all over the country. And then he was talking about, I have vats of this that has this age. You can tell us exactly these pathogens, they've lived this long. We can know how long it takes to sterilize and all this stuff. And he was talking about the tremendous capability they had to just figure out what was inside the gut of people. And this was back in like fresh out of World War II, I think, or a little before. I don't quite remember the time period. But I guess what I mean to say is no one woke up as a kid and say, I'm going to collect poop today and I'm going to love it. Kids always say stuff like, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be an influencer now, or whatever it is nowadays, right? But you have the exposure to a particular topic, then you start answering those questions, and you dig yourself into that hole, and you're like, wow, we can keep going down here. I actually like discovering things, and you keep going down that hole, and like one day you're like the expert in the entire country that's telling other so-called experts what's up in this field now, because of this tremendous capability of measurements and like that you are able to do, and then you're able to predict things, and then like that led to concrete policy decisions that led to Japan being the culture that is today. That's the kind of effect that that guy had. And you don't just wake up thinking you're going to do that, right? You got to get exposed. You got to get around and just know that it's never going to be about what you do. It's about what your capabilities are as a scientist.
If I can add one more thing to that, it's about being exposed, but it's also about being curious to what you're exposed to. And that curiosity is what allows people to figure out solutions, because they start digging into it, like you're saying. So being exposed is good, but having that curiosity to want to figure it out is a critical component.
Oh, absolutely. And if that curiosity comes naturally to you, go for it. That's yours. That's yours now. Take it.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree any more. I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be in regulatory affairs. Like you're not a kid thinking that. So definitely my education helped me figure that out. So I definitely agree with, you have to know experience. Any experience is not necessarily bad. You can gain something from anything that you learn or experience in your life. That's something that we kind of touched on our last discussion, is any experience, it's never bad. It's just determined if you don't want to go down that path or you need to go down a different one. So kind of playing off of that, just kind of understanding how your education served you in your career, in terms of your career, your career path, different skills that you learned from that. And then if Greg, you want to give a little bit of perspective on how students should spend their time in school if they do decide to pursue higher education. How should they spend their time now, or how they should spend their time while they're in their higher education? So if anyone wants to jump in on there, go for it.
One of the things that I was going to add to that is, I already mentioned, what you do to be involved in social organizations on campus is critical to your success. And this organization is a very good example of that. Another thing I would suggest is, what are your internships and internship opportunities, and how are you finding work? Because again, you're getting exposed there. And it was those things more than the classes that I took that led to my opportunities throughout my career. So if you're pursuing master's, doctor, do whatever you can to simultaneously have working experience that you can leverage what you're learning in a practical sense. I cannot stress that enough, because I know a lot of people, they focus 100% on their degree, they get great grades, and then they finish and they're having trouble finding work. I hate to say it, but really your GPA and what your grades are have no correlation to what you're going to do or how well you're going to do in work. So quite honestly, if I'm looking to hire people, I never look at GPA, because for me, it's completely irrelevant. It has a little bit of, okay, this is what I do and push myself to succeed. But there's a lot of other things that can tell me about that just as well. So for me, it's about, what are you doing in addition to the academic information that you are learning, and how can you leverage that to build your career?
And if I may add to that, actually, yeah, absolutely. As you get further and further along in your career, things like GPA really just, if anything, it's more, the GPA will help you get into the grad school that you want. But then after that, it's more of the, what did you accomplish? What experiences have you gained? That'll really make an impact. Yeah, I rarely I've been on that hiring end too, and you rarely you look for, okay, I wonder what their GPA was, and you follow up with them. Hey, can you tell me like what grade did you get in your chem class? So yeah.
Never crosses my mind.
I want to actually.
So you go first.
Sure. I want to echo what's been said. I felt like joining campus organizations during my undergrad and grad programs really helped me actually see what my passions were. And tying back to that previous question, joining an organization, I don't know if you've heard of it, TEDx, UC Irvine, and being part of that founding group and discovering that, oh wow, I really like marketing, and here I am in this organization, like making brochures and videos and designing websites and doing all this creative work. And when I started my career as an engineer, I really missed that. It was like, wow, that was a lot more fun than spending all this time in a cubicle, like working on fluid dynamics. And I think that really sparked, okay, I was really passionate about that back then when I was in that organization. And now, like, not so much. I remember when we would put on that TEDx show for UCI, I was so excited to get up in the morning and like, oh my God, today's the day. It's showtime. We have this huge lineup of speakers. I've learned so much for them, and making this brochure was so much fun. And I didn't get that same spark, going every day to my, cubicle engineering job. And I think when I reflected on that familial pressure to like pursue a master's before you're old and gray and, you're not thinking about school anymore, I thought about that, and my family was pressuring me to pursue my master's in engineering because I was already on that track, sunk cost and all the rest. And I think reflecting back on my campus organization time, I was like, but I'm really passionate about, marketing, product marketing, and, designing. And so by getting that MBA, I was able to kind of tap into that passion and say, okay, maybe I can pivot towards that passion and make that my career, while still, keeping what I've learned in the medical device industry and now pursuing that further. So I think, sometimes it is that exposure, but it's also sometimes innate inside of you. Like, what's that thing that like really sparks joy? Not to quote Marie Kondo, but I think that like that's what you really should pursue. And whether that is coupled with something that you're already doing, I think, campus orgs really help let that spotlight inside of you shine through. So yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, so I completely agree with everything that's been said so far. I wanted, though, to touch on how your education really can change your trajectory or can impact kind of what comes next. I think that advanced degrees teach advanced degree candidates many, many things. And probably the most supreme from a holistic development standpoint is that, most people will say when they get through their PhD programs that it's like, it's the hardest thing you ever do. For those of us who are moms, I think we would beg to differ, but PhD degrees are quite tough. I think similarly for MBA programs, they're also very rigorous, and they're taxing students at a whole other level. And so I think that when you go into then the workplace and you are armed with a PhD or an MBA or whatever advanced degree, whatever, what you are coming with is what people will recognize as, okay, that degree, that's fine, yeah. That gets you in the door, you are skilled at XYZ, molecular biology, product design, whatever. You're skilled at that gets you in the door. But I think that there are skills that come along the way in communication, in presentation, in solving problems, in troubleshooting, in resilience, in dealing with failure. I mean, that I could list from here till next year, the soft skills that we build when we pursue advanced degrees, working in teams and carrying the dead weight of our friends and other students, and you name it, right? Negotiating skills, just, it could go on forever. So there's the whole litany of soft skills that you learn. There's the hard skills, which would correlate to like what you end up with for your GPA and those other things that everyone has already said no one really looks at. I think though the GPA and doing well gets you in the door. I don't think that we can deny that, you know, many of the filters will judge you on some minimum standard. So has to have at least a 3.5, you know, so if you killed yourself and got a 4.0 like I did, well, you got the 3.5 or above, you're in the door. So what I'm saying is you get the hard skills, you get the soft skills. It definitely changes though what you take to the table. And the reason why I say that is because when I when I finished my PhD, I felt like I had landed on the moon. I mean, I had been through some really tough times to get there. And you know, if you are a fan of like Piled Higher and Deeper comics, and you were into like all the, you know, all the quotes and the sayings about PhD or whatever, you know, it's not a PhD if it doesn't make you cry, stuff like that. It's because it's tough, right? So when I got to the end, I really felt like I'd accomplished something big. But I'd have to say that I think that then gave me the feeling of empowerment to then just do whatever. So I mentioned that I thought of doing an MBA while I was in my second or third year. By the time I went to Merck and I started working in my first job out of graduate school, and I should also add here that a part of that trajectory change is your earning potential. There are studies that show that when you come in with a bachelor's, you start here. When you come in with a master's, it bumps you up. When you come in with a PhD, it bumps you up further and on, right? So I started my first job, I was already making 6 figures because of that PhD. And then as I did research in the labs at first, and then I transitioned to program management. And while I was in that role, I realized that, you know, I still had that burning feeling to start my own company. I still had that burning feeling to be a mistress of my own fate, as it were. And so I took a very bold and brave step, and I stepped out on that faith, and I eventually started my own company. It's a consulting company, so I'm still working in science. And as a matter of fact, right now I'm actually based at Johnson & Johnson, which is why you're seeing their logo in my background. But the thing about it is that education and those skills, I think that they all play a role in those pathways that we forge for ourselves, especially when there are pathways that are unique ones, and you know, ones where you literally have to get out the machete and chop the bush from ahead of you because no one's been that way before. Those skills are key, especially on those journeys that aren't well traveled.
Yeah, that's a lot of great advice and understanding of what higher education could provide to you. Sounds like you do gain a lot of soft skills. Like you said, working in teams. I constantly work in teams, so I know that's something that definitely helped when you came into the industry. Negotiation skills, just a lot of soft skills that you can learn. So one of the questions that we had from the audience is, how much of your higher education do you leverage on a daily basis in a professional setting? And I know you kind of touched on some of it, but does anyone else have anything to add on that?
If I may actually add on to a couple Rose, that was just so beautifully put, and it's just you touched upon so many important points. And I think one of the big things that stood out to me was this idea of like you're continuing to learn. So what you gain from your time in undergrad and grad school, you're gaining these hard skills, soft skills, and going back to even that whole curiosity thing. That's kind of what's driving you forward. And you can't predict the future, but with these different tools that you gain along the way, that opens the door for that next thing. Say like, yeah, you're really interested in industry. That doesn't mean that that first job you get in industry is the one that you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. It could very well be like that. Like say you just love research and you're just going to continue on in that. But it opens the door for so many other directions that you could pivot to, where the skills that you keep accumulating will not only prepare you but also inform different potential directions that you can go in that you could have never expected. And so, and getting back to like that, this topic about like finding your passion or curiosity. Sometimes, yeah, like it's a numbers game. Sometimes you want, that's why you want to keep exposing yourself to different things, but sometimes you might not find it. But at least you kind of find, okay, I'm kind of interested in this. You go in that direction and you're actively like putting the work into it to get the most of it, right? Like during your grad school time, like how different organizations that you get involved with, or how you interact with your PIs, or you collaborate, like just all these different things are adding on to you different skills that you can apply in so many different areas, from which when that thing comes to you that you find yourself super passionate about, you'll be that much more prepared for it. And so don't let the search for perfection prevent you from taking that first step to like that first step in something that looks good, right? Don't let yourself be paralyzed by thinking I need to have all this kind of figured out and everything squared away in order for me to really start making headway in it. No, it's, as you can tell, like you can't predict where it's going to lead, but you make the most of the situation that you're in. In like kind of the things that were addressed right now, like about curiosity and just like and working hard and putting yourself out there and learning social skills, like those kinds of things are things that you could do right now, whether you're like in undergrad or grad school or wherever. Like these are things that you can proactively grow in, that will better position you for whatever the future holds for you. So.
If I may, one thing I'd like to point out is back when we were introducing ourselves, most of us were like, we started doing something completely different, and now we're doing something, we're in web devices now. It's kind of how it's going to go for most people, I think. And that being said, so I was starting on a different question, excuse me. So the question was asked about the, like how do you leverage how much do you leverage your education, right? So I guess to add on to what everyone else was saying, like it depends on how you ask, like what kind of context you're talking about. Do I do a lot of free energy calculations nowadays based on atomistic simulations? No. Most of my work is done under a microscope or something else. Simulations at a more macro scale than atomistic, right? So I don't do any of that. So no, that doesn't help me at all. But as everyone else is saying, like, who did I have to become to get through my program? That is something I use every goddamn day. That, because you don't stop being yourself, number one, that'd be weird. But also, like, yeah, those soft skills about how to talk to people, how to work in teams, how to broach like uncomfortable topics, but are also very technical stuff. Like, yeah, you have to figure that out. Oh, this data didn't work out. Well, I gotta tell those guys. They're not gonna be real happy about it, but it is the truth, and we have to share it as it is, right? So, and like, for example, I had my first and so far only breakdown 2 weeks before my qualifying examination. So yes, it is very hard. PhD comics is it's not satire. It's documentary. Keep that in mind. It is hard. But that being said, it was also during that time that I, went through counseling, figured out like, hey, have I been diagnosed? Have I been depressed this entire time? And I've just finally been diagnosed with that. Holy crap! Understanding that, and even through all that pain, I was able to like kind of deal with what was like all that stuff inside. And I won't go into details about that unless someone asks. But that's the idea, that who I am now at the other side of it, having had to deal with myself. And then finally, like, despite all the stress, this is kind of bumping up against another question, Kevin, that you're asking in the chat. Despite all the stress, like, I have to march forward. This is something I want to do. This is something I set out to do, and I'm going to do it. And ultimately, I think it was that final statement that when I told myself, I am going to do it. There was no conversation about like, can I do it? How am I going to be able to? That was just the core of it, and that's it. And that's something I do carry with me all the time. And that's something I have to use because, yeah, startup. I work in Metronome's a startup, right? So, and startups are hard. Hard as grad school, I would say, if not harder some days in terms of stress. But it just, honestly, it first starts with saying that you're going to. Then your brain will align. It just comes. And that's a skill that you can only develop through experience, right? So I would say just start.
I think one of the important things to also consider is your education is not a destination, it's a journey. Your career is not a destination, it's a journey. And part of making the most of your journey is keeping your head up, keeping your eyes open, and seeing what's around you on the journey. And that's where you get exposed to a lot of different things. You might be able to see by my background that I have a lot of basketball stuff. The name of my coaching firm is called Above the Rim Executive Coaching. And I believe that the parallels of athletics really correlate to what's going on to success within the corporate world. And I had the pleasure of coaching my kids' basketball teams when they were very young. And I don't know if you've ever watched kindergartners play basketball, but it is, talk about herding cats. It's a lot of fun. But when kids first learn to dribble, the first thing they do is they focus 100% of their attention on their hand bouncing the ball. Their face is down, almost buried in the ball. The first time they get the ball in a game situation, they look straight down at the ball, they start dribbling, they go in a straight line, and one of three things happen. They end up trapped in a corner, they end up too far under the basket, or I've seen them keep dribbling out of bounds until they run into a wall because they're still looking at the ball. So when you're in your academic environment, keep your head up, keep your eyes open, see what's going on around you. Don't put your head down to focus 100% on, I need to get this GPA, I need to do this, I need to do that. Keep your heads up. But once you get into your career, keep your head up, keep looking around, keep focused, because otherwise you're going to find yourself suddenly out of a job, not having the right updated education. So in the journey, keep your head up, keep your eyes open, stay curious, keep trying to figure things out, see things, oh, wow, this is something I can explore. Be curious, always be curious. But that isn't going to happen unless you can keep your head up and unless you know this is a journey that you're on.
So I have something to add to how we maintain motivation for continuous learning in the workplace, specifically addressing Kevin's question. On top of all the daily pressures and stress that we face from family, from work, from all around us, I would say that, first of all, motivation comes in two types. It's extrinsic and it's intrinsic. There are people who have a natural love of learning, and that drives them, whether they're at work or at home, to keep learning, to keep reading, to keep making themselves better mentally, making themselves stronger. And then there's extrinsic. And I think that a lot of us face actually more extrinsic pressures in today's workplace to constantly be better, to constantly be faster, to constantly be more competitive than our peers, than the next company, because of, I mean, essentially the world that we're living in and working in now, right? So those extrinsic pressures are always there for you to improve yourself. And then, of course, I think that we should, want to, as humans, continue improving until we die, essentially. That's what I would say as far as how we maintain motivation.
That actually reminded me, Rose, so one bit of specific advice I'd like to add on top of for that question is consider the idea. I'm not saying that it's true, just consider the idea that it's a trap, and it's a trap that you put yourself in. As Greg was saying, when you have your eyes down on the ball and just doing this, just trying to grind something out, consider that that's a trap, and you're the one that's putting your eyes to the ball, eyes to the ground, right? So I guess kind of my takeaway from what you're saying, Greg, is the idea of bringing your head up. Don't be afraid to, if you need to, just take a pull back, then take a look around you, see what's going on, and then kind of reassess before diving back in. Because sometimes maybe we do just need a reminder of why we're here, why we were curious about this to begin with, why we ended up down this particular hole, right? And sometimes that does help a lot. Just understanding hey, the world's not going to end and fall apart if this doesn't get done right now.
That is so true. And breathing helps.
Yeah, I want to add a little bit to that. I think I agree with everything that's been said about motivation, and I think for myself, reflecting on working full time at a startup, which is very challenging, and at the same time going to night school to do my MBA. It was a lot of time management, and as I went through it, I think maybe a year into the program, someone asked me how do you do this? You're learning until 10 p.m. then you come home. When do you eat? How are you doing this? And I think in that moment when I reflected back on it, I didn't realize how much fun I was having until then. I was like, well, it's fun. I'm excited after work to go and learn about strategy and management and all these things. And my response back to that person was I don't know, it's fun. I manage it because I want to, and because I had that intrinsic motivation to just keep going and keep learning. And I think at that point I was I'm on the right path, because if it's, easy for me to manage and get all this done, and I don't feel bad about it, and I'm excited for the next day that I'm going to learn, then I'm on the right path. And, if it starts becoming something that's difficult, maybe that needs some reevaluating. But I think once you find something that you're so excited about, it just comes naturally.
I think you're living in your ikigai zone.
I hope so.
Sounds like a lot of our responses are still kind of going back to finding that passion. And even though when you're still trying to figure out that passion, it still seems like it's okay not to have everything planned out already. And at the same time, you're not the only person that doesn't have it all figured out. There's plenty of other people that are just like you, trying to figure it out, thinking this is your passion, and then starting to move on to something else, and then figuring something else out. Like they said, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. So those are all really good advice to students that are looking to potentially go into higher education. and how to perceive that higher education rather than feeling like you're just so overwhelmed, constantly trying to figure out what you're going to do with your life. Kind of transitioning away from this a little bit, we did want to touch on certifications. So not just higher education as in grad school or PhD. Can you guys maybe touch on a little bit of the different certifications you guys have gotten, or ones that you're looking into potentially getting, and how those have helped you do what you do now?
So I myself have not gotten any certifications, but at certain points I was considering it. So for example, I started off my first set of industry jobs at the bench, so doing research, and it was towards the tail end of that where I was considering, hey, maybe the writing aspect of science is more interesting to me, and that's when like medical writing and publications that kind of started piquing my interest, and that's where I started, doing Google searches naturally, and found that okay, there's like these different certifications that you can get for publication management, for medical writing. But wow, they're kind of expensive and seem to be a big investment. And so I was considering it as like, okay, like if I'm going to maybe try to leverage my experience so far and see if there can be like I don't know, like kind of like an entry level from a PhD standpoint, entry level medical writing position that I might be able to succeed in getting. And so, I was considering those credential things while applying and weighing the different, like keeping my options open. And then thankfully, I happened to be able to get that first medical writing position. So I didn't have to pursue those other credentials in order to break into that industry. But definitely like still looking into those credentials as like, hey, maybe like this would be a good opportunity to learn more of the like different nuances and specifics as well as nuances to medical writing and publication planning and things like that. That's respective to the field that I'm in. But just kind of my personal anecdote on that. That was kind of the journey that I went on, and I'm still considering taking some of those credential courses, although I'm so busy with work. It's like once I maybe carve out some additional time, I'll consider it more seriously.
So I could add to that. I actually have 2 certifications, and how did those come about? My first, which was the Six Sigma Green Belt, I was working in a role where I was still in the lab. And I became very curious about this tool or these set of tools and techniques that help teams guarantee quality and improve processes. And this was one where it was just my natural curiosity. I wanted to learn about Six Sigma. I was very curious about how it could impact a place like a lab, where I knew within pharma, the people who get the green belts and the black belts were my friends in manufacturing. And it's very well understood, why and how you would use Six Sigma in a manufacturing type setting. But I was curious to see how Six Sigma would apply to the lab. And so I did my green belt, and that was essentially the story around that. For my project management certification, that came as a result of me having left the lab now, and I moved over to the PMO at Merck, and I was managing then the oncology biomarker portfolio there. And for both certifications, there is a level of experience that is expected, even understood. So you have to have maybe had several years within the field doing that work as a prerequisite. You do several hours of training. In the case of my Six Sigma training, that would have happened over a period of about 6 months. Where there was training, exams, all kinds of practical exercises. Similarly, with the project management certification, there were also exams and practical exercises and several hours of training. I would say that those certifications, I think, have helped me because of the pathway that I eventually found myself on. So when I started my consulting company, one of the things that I did was I leveraged a combination of everything that was in my background. I had trained in medical imaging. I had managed an oncology portfolio of biomarkers at Merck. I had done years of project management, and essentially what I ended up doing is leveraging all of that in my consulting. And even today, as I'm at Johnson & Johnson, I am managing, oncology biomarker strategy for many of their pharmaceutical assets. So how have I leveraged those certifications? I think it's pretty obvious. And I think that whenever there is a certification that can catapult you to, I'd say, distinguishing yourself from your peers, I'd say credentialing yourself and showing that you are credible in that field or in that area, I think it's always a good idea to go to that next level. I mean, of course, I have many friends who have like 2 PhDs and 2 masters and 2 bachelors and a JD and lots of overachieving friends. And, on top of that, all the certifications to boot. And every week there's another LinkedIn certification on their profile. I believe in being very strategic. I don't have a lot of time, extra time to do a whole lot of extra learning. So as far as getting certified goes, I would say you choose the ones that you can leverage, especially you gear it towards where you see yourself going. So those are like the sprinkles on the cupcake, like they're not quite the icing, they're the sprinkles on the cupcake. Yeah.
That just made me really hungry. So
As a career coach, I think certifications and continuing professional education is critical to career success. And like Dr. Rose was saying, you want to be strategic, but you always want to be curious and look out there and see what else can I do to improve myself? You don't want to have everything under the sun. You want to be strategic. Does it apply to what it is I'm doing? And those things are really important. And the other thing to understand is we live in a world and we work in a marketplace where technology changes at a very, very quick pace. That technology impacts the way we do things, and it doesn't matter what the disciplines are. So when you go to school and you get your advanced degrees, you're spending years doing it. And by the time you finish, much of what you learned in the earlier part of your education is already obsolete. And many of the certification programs are much shorter in duration. And so you have an ability to leverage those immediately. Plus, as Dr. Rose was saying, there's an expectation that you'll have a certain amount of experience to leverage with that. And so for me, once you finish all of your education in academia, your education for your career is not going to stop, but it's the certifications that are going to be a big part of that as you continue to grow through your career. But absolutely be strategic with that. And it will help you get positions. It will help you get promotions. It will help you get paid more, but it will also help you to functionally do your work better.
Yeah, great advice. I do not have a certificate, but there is one for regulatory affairs. So that's something that I've always kind of considered doing. And one of the prereqs was, I think, 2 or 3 years of experience. So now that I've hit that kind of point, it's kind of my next progression in my career is hopefully getting that certificate. Since that was pretty much all of the questions, the last one we have here is, what is your top advice for students that want to work in the industry one day, and what should they be like thinking about now? Will, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I'm trying to think. It's a very broad question, and it would depend on what stage you are at in terms of like, are you undergrad, are you grad student, or beyond? Definitely, what you find a lot of times, unfortunately, with industry positions is this catch-22 of if they want you to have prior industry experience for for a seemingly entry-level job, and it's like, wait, how do I get the experience if you're not like given the opportunity? So one thing that definitely, and these don't come around as often as I wish they did, but they are out there. Different internship opportunities. Though, like if your heart is set on making that transition from academia to industry, whether it's out of undergrad or grad school, really be on the lookout for those, because there's not many out there, but you can find them. And once you have that experience, say that you did it in undergrad and you decide to go to grad school, and then it's after, like, you're still set on, like, yeah, I want to go into industry, you will probably have a higher likelihood of getting that industry position because you still had some prior industry experience. That's just one thought that comes to my mind, that, yeah, specific to that transition question.
Ted, did you want to go next on your top advice for students that want to get into the industry?
Yeah, it's that, well, this one's kind of like a twofold thing. So number one, don't slack on opportunities. If it's something comes up and you think you might be in it, you gotta get on it ASAP, because you never know how many you never know how competitive it is, and there is something to be said about the first mover advantage, right? If you're the first one in line to get that out, to get your application in or whatever. On the other hand, oftentimes those opportunities have to be made. You have to carve it out yourself. You have to, if you see a potential, so let's say, for example, you feel like you're onto something, you hit something that you feel like you have some passion about. So you need to go around and look and talk to people and start start having conversations, at least to get some context and some knowledge as to what you can and can't do in this field, and then start finagling your way, snaking your way through any cracks you can find. And you're going to have to do some searching. Sometimes you're just going to have to find opportunities yourself. And you have to, my suggestion would be jump on it earlier than sooner. If you think it could be a thing, just start looking. And the harder you look, it feels right, and you go down that hole and that hole feels comfortable, go for it.
I think
That's great advice. Go for it.
Yeah, so to add to what Ted is saying, I think what I would recommend is really looking at your network. One of the big skills that we learned in MBA school was networking, and doing it the right way, I think, is also really important. Being strategic about who you reach out to, and maybe collecting informational interviews about those who are in roles that you're interested in. That's, I think, something that you want to start thinking about, because then like Ted said, you can understand what that role looks like. What is a day in the life of a product manager? What do they do? Or maybe I don't want to do that now that I've had that conversation. and your network might be broader than you think. I think as you look at your undergraduate network, if you're an undergrad thinking about a grad program, or if you're graduating from a grad program and you're looking into getting into industry, look at that graduate network, and maybe there's some who are employed, and you can have conversations with them, and maybe they're already part of your network. So it doesn't necessarily have to be some cold call that you do. Although, now with amazing tools like LinkedIn that show you, someone's career progression, and you can sometimes even relate to, oh yeah, that seems like kind of the path that I want to take. Maybe, let me reach out and see if someone's willing to just take a few minutes of their day and have an informational interview. That's something that can be really valuable, because people like talking about themselves, and they like sharing their experiences. And that's why all of these wonderful panelists are here to share their amazing experiences. I've learned so much from just, listening to everyone's stories. And so think of that in terms of your network, and what are the stories that are out there in your network that you can learn from.
If I can add on to that, what Will, Ted, and Reyes have said is 100% true. Number one, get opportunities to work in a corporate environment within the types of companies that you want to work in. Create those opportunities. Ted said it might not be easy to find, but you might have to create your opportunities. It isn't going to happen by accident. It isn't going to come to you if you sit there, but you've got to do it proactively. Actually, throughout my career, I have never, ever, ever had a position that was a result of submitting to an online application. Every single position was a result of networking my way into, having conversations, having informational meetings. And in most of the cases, the positions did not exist prior to me taking that position. In fact, my internship while I was in my undergrad work did not exist. I created it by going to an organization that I thought could use something. I presented the case. They said, okay, great, let's do it. And that created tremendous opportunities for me. So create that. The other thing is, in terms of building your network, connect with every classmate that you have. That should be an absolute given. Connect with your professors. Get to know your professors. Have conversations with them, because they are connected. And when you're ready for internships, they can help you in a lot of different ways. But connect with people. Don't bury yourself in your work. Connect with people. Connect with people. Connect with people. Connect with people. It's what I always teach in my LinkedIn classes is your next job, your next promotion throughout your career is not going to happen because of what you know. And you've all heard the saying, it's not what you know, but who you know that counts. What you know is going to qualify you for the position, but it isn't going to get you that position. But I even go so far as to say it's not even who you know, but rather who knows you and what is their perception of you as a thought leader, subject matter expert, problem solver, someone who provides solutions and values to organizations. That's what's going to be the key to your next opportunity. So I'm going to give a little bit of a shameless plug right now. I am teaching a free LinkedIn class tomorrow night. So I would invite all of you to join. If you do want to come to my LinkedIn class, connect with me on LinkedIn, but there's a little bit of a puzzle to it. You need my email address in order to connect with me on LinkedIn. However, my email address is very easy to find on my profile. So connect with me, let me know you want to come to my LinkedIn class. I'll give you the information on it, and I'd love to see you there.
If I may add to the
Awesome.
about LinkedIn, man, I seriously, it is one of the most powerful tools that you have at your disposal.
It is.
Like, I'm sure you've heard the term LinkedIn stalking. Like, you can just like look up people, like say like you're interested in flow cytometry jobs. What are jobs that people have with flow cytometry? Like, you type that into the search, and you could just start looking at people's profiles and like, oh, okay, like they kind of this is their educational track. They went from this company to this company, and this is kind of like how the titles change. There's so much that you can learn. Sometimes people will put pretty detailed job descriptions. If you've ever tried to apply for jobs, you'll notice that in the job description, sometimes they use they use a lot of jargon. So like even for me, like when I started like looking into medical writing, I'm looking up job descriptions, and they look, they're kind of like hard to understand. So I'm just like looking at people's profiles just to better understand, like, how did they describe the work that they do?
Mm-hmm.
And that just starts building the vocabulary and understanding in my own mind of like, okay, this is what a job in medical writing kind of looks like. And then so that's one element, and then the other is like the ability to just connect with people. So that the current job that I have, like what I did was like I would first be searching for jobs, and then if I found something interesting, I would start looking for people on LinkedIn who I think are in that department, and I would start reaching out and just introducing myself. Not, hey, can you get me a job? Just not even talking about the job really, just introducing myself, a little bit about my background, and then explain, hey, like if I'm curious to know more about your role and how it's been in your organization. If you have uh, if you have a moment, I'd love to get on a informational interview with you. And then, sometimes people don't reply because they're busy, and that's understandable. It's like a numbers game. But the few that actually do, those can be like
gold,
invaluable, right? Like it as a resource to you. You might not get a job through that necessarily, but just to even hear that insight from them, and you have that connection that you might be able to even reach out to them later when there's another job opportunity. So I can't praise LinkedIn enough, and just boast of what an amazing tool it is, and because I could speak for that from my own personal experience.
And if I might add one more secret tip, look for fellow alumni that are working at your target companies. Anteaters love to network with anteaters. It's very, very simple. Leverage that. And like Will said, don't ask for the job, but ask for their story. They are an expert. Treat them as an expert. And people love to tell their stories. And you're going to get great insight. You're going to get great advice. And some things that they say are going to click and say, wow, this is what I really want to do. And you're going to start going down a path to find your passion. But those discussions are I was going to say they're gold, but I'll say they're as valuable as Bitcoin.
So if I were to give my advice, sorry, Erin?
No, your turn, go for it.
Oh, yeah, if I were to give my advice to students interested in transitioning to industry, regardless of where you are in your academic journey, I would say, number one, build your value. And this is with the idea that you are setting your own self up for success. Okay, so these are all the things that you can do to set yourself up for success. Build your value. So you come to whatever industry you're interested in already armed with the best arsenal, whether it is you've done your research and it's an MBA that you need to have that job. So get an MBA. It's a particular SAP certification. It's a whatever. Build your value so that when you get there, you can very comfortably and confidently open that door and just walk in and start performing from day one. That's the first thing I would say. The second I would say is own the outcome that you want. And a lot of what the panelists were talking about around networking and making connections and creating opportunities for yourself is about that. It's about the idea that you're not going to sit back and wait for a job to drop into your lap, or you're not going to, play coy or victim or just whatever. You are going to go and search and essentially own whatever outcome that is, whatever industry position that is. And that'll take quite a few things. It takes knowing the industry, knowing what's needed, knowing what you need to bring to the table. Certainly doing your research, making those connections, as many have alluded to many times, network, and then network again. It's the buzzword for a reason. It's those connections that land us in the places that we end up being in. My first job at Merck, I landed it through an alum, a Mayo alum. All of my subsequent jobs, all of my consultancies based on my network. And essentially what I learned over time is that my ability to earn was going to be directly correlated with my network, the size of my network, the quality of my network and those connections. So if I leave you with those three things: build your value, own the outcome that you want, network.
That is all great advice. So to kind of wrap it all together, it seems like you need to gain some type of experience, especially since a lot of companies require a lot of years of experience just for entry-level jobs. You want to be the first mover on any type of opportunity. You got to sometimes even create those opportunities. And like the panel has said, collectively, it's really important to network and get on LinkedIn. So as we wrap it up today, we're just hit 7 o'clock. Thank you so much to the panelists. I learned a lot. I hope everyone else learned a lot from you guys. I'm sure you have so much more experience and knowledge to share with all of us. So we'll thank you guys, and attendees feel free to message in the chat. We're going to send a follow-up email with all the upcoming events, and feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn. Thank you, everybody.